pleasant good evening. You are listening to the program The Voice of Pilgrim, emanating from Pilgrim Baptist Temple, St. James Road, where our senior pastor is Reverend Dr. Leroy Nathaniel Major. We are known as the Church with the Open Doors, hence our hearts are also open to you. For more information on this radio broadcast, you may contact our church at 393-3644. Sponsors for this broadcast are Jonah Telecom Bahamas Limited at 376-8999, Easy Trucking at 357-4394, The Craft Shack at 829-7412, ATC Financial Advisors and Consultants at 376-0411, and also the fine members of the Pilgrim Baptist Temple.
Tonight, as the country celebrates 48 years of independence, the Voice of Pilgrim pays homage to one of our national treasures, the late Reverend Dr. H.W. Brown, a preacher, an activist, a family man, and a national hero. Join us as the late Sir Charles Carter remembers Reverend Dr. H.W. Brown.
There's never been a Bahamian pastor quite like Dr. H.W. Brown. But then again, there's never been a Bahamian church quite like Bethel Baptist on Meeting Street. In retrospect, they seem destined for each other. The man, the institution. And when they intersected, the country was changed forever. It's a story that needs to be told. Hello again, I'm Charles Carter. Dr. H.W. Brown was an outstanding preacher who used his gifts to advance his country spiritually, socially, and politically. His outspokenness put him at odds with both the old and the new Bahamas. But time nor man can diminish his contributions or example. Dr. H.W. Brown was more than just a regular pastor.
If you do not feel a burden for this country, you are completely out of touch with the reservoir. Today, everywhere people have taken liberty for license, and the rate and direction the country is going, it cannot long endure. For example, in any country where in the daily life of that country, and you hear more of Aretha Franklin's records than you hear about Christ, that country is doomed. Any country that greets its citizens in the morning with what they call the mighty sparrow, more than they do God, they have substituted God for Aretha and Sparrow and all the jazz and calypsos. If God's people fail to speak out, that country will not long endure. How would Amos, Elijah, Daniel, Isaiah, Ezekiel stand the test today? They went to the kings and rulers of their day and said, "Thus saith the Lord." Are you an Amos, an Elijah, a Jeremiah? Then rise up, O men of God. The only thing to fear is fear itself. If you are jealous for God, you will speak out. I am jealous. This country has skyrocketed overnight in material gains. More tourists and investors are on the increase. The greatest security for all this capital coming in is to give God to the people. Don't let us fool ourselves. Statistics will show that there are more drunken and fatal accidents, more insane people in the asylums, more dope addicts, including young boys and girls, more prostitution than ever in our history, more lesbians and sodomites. The question God asked Ezekiel, can these bones live, is applicable to this age. There are people who have eyes but cannot see, and ears and cannot hear the music of heaven. A lot of people can have a lot of material blessings, but might wear them lightly and share with others because they realize that the world is not our home. Others make gods of their material successes, especially if it came unexpectedly. They give God no place, and they forget their friends who help them to be what they are. When a person has a vision of God, he has come into a higher truth. His conversation is in heaven, from whence he looketh forth to the coming of the Son of God. He knows no east, no west, no north, no South, no Afro-Bahamian, no Euro-Bahamian. He does not think in terms of pigmentation. Ezekiel, can these bones live? This is not a trivial transient question. It is a question asked by God himself. Dry bones are seen in every section of this country, and the question is propounded in our ears. Can these bones live in this sophisticated society, in this fast-going society of the semi-nudist brand? Men dress so normally, I don't know, but the hippers and some of the women who have lost all decency in style of dress must be possessed by Apollyon. Son of man, can these bones be resurrected and adopt a new and better way of life? Can these bones live that this country under God will have a new birth of freedom? That those high on pedestals will find their true place at the cross of Calvary? Can these bones live? These bones that have moved in competition with the church at 11 a.m. on Sunday on the ball fields and elsewhere. Bahamas, as a preacher of God, I serve notice on you that if our political government that has done so much good for the poor, and will I feel do more as the days come and go, but if they fail to balance this country with the spiritual good as they have done the material good, God will intervene, and there will be no man-made institution to defeat the powers of heaven. Can these bones live? I trust that God will speak in these morning devotions this week and give me the grace and the power to tell it like it is. The people need to be told the story as it is. Can these bones live? These bones are dry, dead, petrified, lifeless. They were at one time the voice of the country. They had power behind them. When they spoke, there was some action. But now they are scattered, dull, drab, dead. Can they revive and stand on their feet and live again? Ezekiel, can these bones live?
That was Dr. H.W. Brown's message to the Bahamas the week beginning April 21st, 1969. Those words confirmed that Dr. Brown, who championed all the historic changes in our country, from the women's right to vote in the 50s to majority rule in the 60s, had lost faith in the Bahamas. His efforts had spawned. He attacked the new lifestyles of the Bahamian, from our taste in music to the appeal that drugs, materialism, crime, and alternate lifestyles were having. The Bahamas was becoming more secular than spiritual in his view, and the government was no better. His greatest venom, though, was for the churches of the Bahamas and pastors who did not cry out and condemn these obvious sins. A. Loftus Roker knew Dr. Brown well. He knew of Dr. Brown's courage in the old and new days of the Bahamas pre-independence.
Well, first of all, if you got to recall, Dr. Brown's family, I think they're from Eleuthera or somewhere, but his family, they were fairly well-educated black people for that day. His brother, he had a brother who was an out-island commissioner, and he himself was well-educated. When he got his doctorate in divinity, that wasn't something somebody gave him some place, He studied for that. That was worth something. He was probably the first sort of outside the Catholic Anglican churches where he had a doctorate which meant something. That is why also, I always say when they talk about Penland and Hannah and things like that, no matter how I disagreed with those fellas, when they came home as people with degrees from an English university and joined the PLP, in my view, they made a sacrifice to do it, because they would have been better off financially if they didn't look at the PLP. And they brought, in my view, a degree of respectability to the PLP. I put Dr. Brown in that same category. He was not just an ordinary street preacher. He was an educated preacher. Talmud Sands too. was in that same way, and he went away and he studied. He was supposed to be a Methodist, and the Methodists didn't want a black preacher, so that's how he ended up with Zion Baptist Church. But you had to listen to Dr. Brown. And that is why Dr. Brown is one of the few black preachers during those days who came on ZNS on morning devotion, you know.
Yeah.
They used to screen you now. Ain't no any jackleg fella could jump up and say he doing morning devotion now.
Absolutely.
And so Dr. Brown did something, and when he spoke, you listen. He had influence because people believed this fella was well read and he should know what he's talking about.
Well, in 1969, and you heard a little bit of his memorable morning devotions, Can These Bones Live? When he railed out about the secularization of the Bahamas, he, in 2 years after majority rule, felt the country was going the wrong way, that we were losing our values, that people in high places were more concerned about material gains than spiritual gains, and that the people of the Bahamas were adopting American ways as opposed to the old nice Bahamian ways.
That is true. But you know, I also, in those days, I was a little worried about these sermons, to tell you the truth, from a political point of view. But you know, if you go back and check them, he gave credit to the PLP for the economic benefits which the average Bahamian received under the PLP leadership. He gave credit for that. But then he went on to show where, from a spiritual point of view, though, we were losing ground. And he was fearful of where we were headed. Right or wrong, that I believe that he was sincere in his beliefs.
But right or wrong, the evidence would show that he was right.
it turned out now
Yeah.
that he is right, because we seem to have lost our whole moral, spiritual compass these days. No matter, you find all these churches going up all over the place and all these millions spent on building churches and all these preachers with the latest suits on and stuff like that. During Dr. Brown's time, you know, he didn't get very much money.
He had to scrap.
He was scrapping. He had to scrap.
Yeah.
And so I say that we didn't heed him. And one of the reasons we didn't heed him was because we thought he was being anti-PLP at that point, I think. I was in the PLP, so I suspect that. I had no personal problem with him, but I suspect that, and that's one of the reasons why I believe we didn't pay as much attention to him as we ought to have paid. Because if we did, you know, we may have been able at that stage to do something to correct where we were going wrong.
Well, several of the things that he pointed at has gotten worse. He talked about the murder and mayhem on the streets. Well, that's gotten worse. He's talked about the low moral lifestyles of the average Bahamian. That's gotten worse. He talked about the fact that we were playing numbers and we were listening to obeah men. All that seems to have gotten worse in our society. So that when I say Dr. Brown was right, his observations of the way we were headed spiritually seem to have been right on.
Yeah, not only, when you look at the thing, I was saying the other day, when the PLP came to power in 1967, shortly thereafter, the government took a decision that all government offices would be closed on Saturdays. They didn't give any particular specific reason for that, other than giving people more time. Mm-hmm. But I believe that had a religious significance, in that it should have pleased the Seventh-day Adventists, people who worship on Saturdays. I believe today, if Dr. Brown was alive, when the government of the day decided that we can open shop all day on Sunday to please the cruise ships, I believe Dr. Brown would have been demonstrating. He would have had marches to point out that that was wrong. And it was wrong for a lot of reasons, even if you were not a religious person. It meant now that you were out of your house 7 days a week. So when do you have time to talk to your children? Forget the religion part of it now. But at least on Sundays you're home and your children are home and you see them and you could talk to them, you could find out what they were doing through the week. Now you have no time for that anymore now. You may not see them at all, because when you come home, it's probably when they're already in bed, and by the time you get up to go to work before they get up to go to school. And so we have, in my view, deteriorated, and Dr. Brown probably was a visionary in that he saw this coming, and it's gotten worse, because there's nobody now like Dr. Brown who is out there. Everybody out there trying to make money, so I suspect the preacher is probably happy for you to be working Saturday and Sunday so you could bring more money into the church.
Dr. H.W. Brown was the pastor of historic Bethel Baptist Church for 40 memorable years from 1939 to 1979. He was classically trained, receiving a B.A. from the American Baptist Theological Seminary in Nashville, Tennessee. He authored 3 books and later obtained a doctorate of divinity. He built Bethel into a mighty institution and had vision for his country that he helped to unfold. That Dr. Brown had courage and conviction is evidenced by his stands, some of them very unpopular, pre and post 1967. The Honorable A. Loftus Roker speaks to the spiritual vacuum that Dr. Brown noticed in his historic series of sermons.
We pretend to say less government. That's not true. What we're saying is less rules. What we don't want is discipline.
So 7-day shopping, for example, would be something that would be abhorrent to Dr. Brown.
Oh, yeah. He wouldn't want any shops open on Sunday. See, this is the problem. And today, it's free for all. You do anything you want to do. You try to do what is right, even though it's difficult, even though you don't always succeed, but you're always trying to do what is right. That's what I think was Dr. Brown's sort of core message for most of his time as a preacher.
Yeah. And it's the absence of the spiritual life in public affairs that he decried as well. I mean, that was his main thing, that we were getting away from our basic values. And while we were doing the best we can, we thought, for people, giving them everything you could provide, that too caused the deterioration.
But that was short of what they needed. You see, what you were giving them was a lot of material things, you thought, and you figured that was all that they needed. But that's a part of what they needed. But they needed the spiritual things too, because the economic benefits were supposed to help them to enjoy some of the spiritual things, which they were being denied because we put less emphasis on the value of those things. Of course, you see, again, that is where I say we didn't give as much credit to Dr. Brown. I suppose recognition, sort of, not credit, recognition to Dr. Brown as we should, because he did a lot for the PLP. In the hard days before 67, when we're having meetings, you could depend on him. He can be out there on that platform. When there's an appeal for collection, he is leading the appeal for collection.
And when it's time to pray, he can pray in such a way that people who know their Bible will be able to appreciate and understand what he was saying in that prayer.
That is right. Yeah. And so he did that. I suspect in some ways when he was writing, for instance, those dry bone sermons, that he was disappointed in the direction that the PLP took. Not in the economic direction, because he gave you credit for that. He says that the people are better off under the PLP from an economic point of view. But spiritually, we had lost our sense of direction, which was probably true. And he worried about that. And
our chase of the almighty dollar concerned him.
Yeah.
Because he, as a country, don't forget now, that same year, 1969, was the first year that we had 1 million tourists.
Yeah.
And that was a big mark for this country, for a Caribbean country, but a big mark for the Bahamas in its major business. And that meant more money coming in. And he said, that money and those investments coming in would be more secure if you were more godlike.
But no. The concept is that if you criticize in your party, you're disloyal. And that is how, in a way, Dr. Brown fell prey to that too.
Yeah.
Because once he preached sermons like dry bones,
Oh, yeah.
then he was against
Yeah.
the government
Yeah.
and the party, and we didn't even want to talk to him anymore.
Dr. H.W. Brown was born May 28, 1910 in Allistown, Eleuthera. I was one of 14 children, 8 boys and 6 girls. He and his own wife Federica had 11 children. Willa Ann Brown, deceased. John Whitfield Andrew Brown, retired electrical engineer for Gulf Limited, Baton Rouge, Louisiana, USA. Dr. Portia Brown, Jordan, retired educator, evangelist of Refuge Ministries International, Bahamas. Othello Brown Missick, retired educator, evangelist, Restored Family Ministries International, Turks and Caicos Islands. Darnell Brown Miller, retired administrator of the Department of Rehabilitative Services here in the Bahamas. Margaret Melrose Brown, deceased. Gloria Brown Glinton, science teacher, Ministry of Education, Bahamas. Harcourt Victor Brown, Director of Labor, Bahamas Government. Christopher Joseph Brown, President, Tri-Point Communications, Bahamas. Miswa Brown Rich, Consultant, Sales and Marketing, Alameda County, California, USA. And Owen Gladstone Brown, Vice President, Tri-Point Communications, Bahamas. Dr. H.W. Brown died on April 11, 1979. He was only just 69 years of age. It's a tribute to his qualities that he is still vividly remembered, and his sermons, especially Son of Man, Can These Bones Live?, are collector's items. Dr. Brown's fearless advocacy has become a standard for the ages. His legacy lives on as well in the hearts, minds, and memory banks of his family, who share some of their own reflections. Listen to Portia.
He was by birth a Methodist, but the call of God, he felt the call of God on his life. I recall him telling us as a young man he went to the dance hall with some of the other guys, but somehow he didn't feel comfortable in there. He told us how his heart would begin to race every time he would enter the dance hall. And he went to an elderly lady that he knew was in the church and asked her, why am I feeling this way? And she said, son, you have the call of God on your life, and you will never feel comfortable where you are until you get into the calling for which God has called you. And she then told him that she sensed that he is called into the ministry. Well, he knew this somewhat because at the age of 10, as he told us, in Hatchet Bay, he would get up on the trunk, an old trunk that was in the yard, and call all of the neighborhood children, and he would preach to them. And so the call was visualized as early as 10 years of age. Now, one day he was walking along with another friend down Delancey Street, and there were some folks upstairs on the porch. I forgot whose house it was, and they were discussing something, and he hailed the persons up there that he knew, and immediately they said, "Come up here, Brown, you're just the person we want to see." And it was someone who had come to the Bahamas to recruit students to the Baptist Seminary. And it was on that occasion that he was given a scholarship, and he went off to Tennessee to pursue the ministry.
Darnell, did your dad ever talked about being in Tennessee at that particular time?
I know from an educational standpoint, he always talked about the experience of, meeting so many people, either there were a number of ministers from the Bahamas and of course this was later in years, there were a number of ministers that attended the same seminary. But when he was attending the seminary, he never said anything to me about that.
I do recall conversations with Daddy with respect to that period of his life, and I recall him talking about things like there were, of course, a lot of men because it was a male theological seminary, so there were a lot of men there. And I also recall him talking with his colleagues, in particular Reverend McPhee, Reverend Colebrook, Reverend Cooper, and they spent a lot of time together, and they talked about what they were going to do upon their return to the Bahamas. And some of the things they talked about were things that young boys talked about, young men in their teens. They would find them a pretty girl. They were going to have large families. I remember him talking about those things and saying that in fact they decided on how much they wanted in terms of, this is before they found the women that they were gonna spend the rest of their lives with, that they would talk very often about the size of their families, and I think we got to appreciate too that back in those days having large families was part and parcel of what ministers and preachers, particularly black preachers, that was the thing, because and very often my dad, I heard him say over and repeatedly, he said, well, if no one comes to church, I've got a church right in my family. And he lived that life.
Immediately when he graduated from college, he took up a position in Bimini. And my Uncle George, who happens to be the police officer, he was in Nassau, and he heard that Bethel Baptist Church was recruiting a new pastor at the time, and he contacted him right away and asked him to apply, because there were members in the church that had heard of him and wanted him to apply. And he applied, and of course, he was taken in the Board of Trustees, conducted an interview, and he accepted the position as pastor of Bethel.
My father was a people's person, and he was a pastor that practiced inclusion, in that it was always his desire to the extent that he was able to involve persons. Unlike today, you have some situations where you would have the pastor basically being involved in every aspect of the church's operation. He was a man who believed in education, and he believed in training those who were under him. And as such, he also trusted them in terms of delegating levels of authority to them, and giving them the latitude to exercise that authority. Even though he was well learned and had gone off to seminary, had obtained his doctorate degree, he was able to connect with the common person. He was able to communicate with them on their level and have them feel comfortable when speaking with them.
Another thing I wanted to mention about his sermons was the fact that nothing was taboo. And it didn't matter who was in power, it didn't matter what was taking place. He was that person who, if he was dissatisfied and he felt there was suffering, he spoke up about it.
The story of Dr. H.W. Brown, his life enriching ours.
We hope you have enjoyed our trip down memory lane. If you would like to hear a rebroadcast, please visit our page on Facebook at The Voice of Pilgrim, or YouTube at The Voice of Pilgrim Baptist Temple. Join us again next Monday for another exciting show. Until then, God bless you and enjoy your week.
Thank you for listening to the program The Voice of Pilgrim, which was brought to you by Jonah Telecom Bahamas Limited, 376-8999, They install and maintain telecommunication towers from Bimini and Grand Bahama in the north to Inagua in the south to ensure clear, continuous cellular service throughout the Bahamas. Easy Trucking at 357-4394. They specialize in flatbed and container deliveries and 20 to 40-foot chassis rentals. They make trucking easy with over 24 years of experience in the heavy hauling business. The Craft Shack, Wolf Road, opposite the Windsor Park, 829-7412, specializing in junk canoe and carnival supplies, balloons and party supplies, hats, fascinators, and jewelry making items. They supply the items, tools, and decorations for all your craft needs. ATC Financial Advisors and Consultants, with over 19 years experience in accounting and auditing, they offer reliable and professional service in internal audit, enterprise risk management, corporate governance, financial planning, and accounting. For more information, call them at 376-0411 or visit their website at www.atcadvisors.com. And also, the fine members of the Pilgrim Baptist Temple, tune in next week, same time, same station, where we will be happy to bring you another interesting broadcast of The Voice of Pilgrim. God bless you and have a wonderful evening.